right, we have finally made it to the end of the Unit 6 notes. And so let's go ahead and start this PowerPoint on energy conservation. Okay, so when we're talking about energy conservation, there are things that we can do to conserve energy at both the individual level, so at the consumer level, but then also at the large scale, like industrial, government wide, global sort of level. So let's talk about the small scale versus the large scale actions that can be taken in terms of energy conservation. So, individuals can do like some simple things like lowering their thermostat to use less heat in the winter and raising their thermostat in the summers to use less AC. They can also do things like conserving water by planting native grasses or instead native grasses and native plants instead of just having non-native monoculture of grass. They can install low flow shower heads. They can use efficient toilets and dishwashers and all of the different appliances can actually be used. They can put better insulation in their homes. There's so many things. There's lots of different things that can be done. Um, and, as you become homeowners and consumers, I think it's important. I know we did our energy audit when we were doing our carbon footprint and our energy footprint. I think it's important for you to consider ways that you could reduce your footprint, which would save you not only save energy, but it also saves you money in the long run. Some things that governments can do and industry manufacturing can do to help conserve energy is improve things like fuel efficiency standards. And so the auto industry has improved that based on like different government regulations. Um, Fuel efficiency has drastically improved in my lifetime, but and that technology's been around for a long time, but I know, one reason that it hasn't been pushed out faster has to do with the oil and gas industry. They don't really, I mean, they want to make money, and so one way to make money is to have your cars have a lower mile per gallon fuel efficiency, and then we're buying more gasoline. And so that has been something that car companies, a lot because of consumer demand, but also because of, potentially government regulations or incentives to improve fuel standards. So over the last several years, fuel standards have improved from, on average of 20 miles a gallon. We're now up to 30 miles a gallon for cars. Um, and so that's huge in terms of what kind of implications that can have on a larger scale. Uh, Governments can subsidize and give tax credits for electric vehicles. That's something we see happening. They can improve infrastructure, which is happening currently by adding more charging stations for electric vehicles and hybrids. And so that's been crucial to encouraging consumers to purchase more renewable forms of automobile, transportation. They can, Governments can, and municipalities can also increase public transport, including by adding things like more buses, light rail systems. Um, uh, Corporations and businesses can actually incorporate more green building designs into their infrastructure. So all of these things can be done to improve the energy savings that we're seeing around the world. Um, we can actually, as consumers, have a more sustainable home design. So that's either by figuring out ways to block out the sun during the summer or absorb the sun during the winter. We talked a little bit about that during the solar energy unit notes. And so this actually would cut down on the amount of energy that's required. So doing things like planting deciduous trees that provide shade in the summer and lose their leaves and allow in the sunlight during the winter was really important to have around your home. You can also incorporate a passive house design, which you can see here, where the windows on the house face the south side of the home. This is something that I would love to do when I potentially downsize, is have a house that actually incorporates some of these, um, sustainable, like passive solar, you know, characteristics. Using a passive solar design, the whole concept, as we talked about in the solar energy notes, is trapping the sun's heat in the winter and decreasing the amount of sunlight during the summer. And so those are some different things that can be done. You can also improve the insulation in your walls in your attic. And this decreases the electricity used by your AC unit and by your heating system. So all of those are really important. Some ways to conserve water would be like we talked about, getting rid of grass and planting native species. This is one example of that, and it requires less watering than traditional lawns. It increases biodiversity, as we see, and it can actually increase the not only just all insect biodiversity, but it can increase pollinator biodiversity as well, which is important for maintaining the uh, biodiversity of ecosystems. It even requires less fertilizer, which is something that's really important. Okay, some other things that can be done to conserve water would be to install some low flow showers, toilets, excuse me, low flow dishwashers. All of these things do the same job, but they use less total water. So it's less energy, or less water, I mean, to purify. It's less water to pump to homes, takes less energy to pump that water to the homes. Rain barrels can also be installed for watering plants and for washing cars. Ways that we can conserve energy in terms of transportation. Well, first of all, it's important to note that 20%, 8% of the total US energy comes from transporting goods and people. This was as of 2019. And so improving our fleet of vehicles, fuel economy is really important by either using more renewable forms of fuel, whether that be biodiesel or just requiring less less gasoline, or even maybe by incorporating electric vehicles into fleet stocks. That can be really important. One acronym that you should know is, well, you should understand what CAFE standards are. CAFE standards stand for, or CAFE standards stand for Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards. These are regulations set in the US that require auto manufacturers to make cars that meet these mile per gallon standards, or else the car manufacturers have to pay penalties. And so these standards have been something that have become more stringent over the last, 40 years. You can see here in 1980 up until, the late 2000s, up until like 2020, the CAFE standards for cars have have increased dramatically. So we've got domestic cars doing much better than they used to. You can see where they used to be back when I was a kid, where they are now. Fleet vehicles have improved, trucks have improved dramatically, and then here's import cars. They've also improved. Import cars used to be really good, and they've just gotten better. So that's actually really good news. All right, you can also drive a hybrid like the Prius, which has both a gasoline and an electric engine. Um, you can even get plug-in hybrids now, which is very cool, that they can just run solely off electricity unless, and then, you can have gas in them for when you need to have go a longer distance. Um, this just allows them to have higher mile per gallon ratings. The braking system in a hybrid actually charges the electric battery, which powers the electric motor. You can have fully electric vehicles, or like I said, the plug-in hybrids, where they can be electric or hybrid. Um, Things like the Tesla and the Nissan Leaf use no gasoline, but they still require electricity. So they're only as sustainable. What I don't necessarily love about electric vehicles is they're only as sustainable as the electric source that you're getting. And here in Indiana, most of our electricity comes from coal. So just saying you have an electric vehicle isn't necessarily improving the amount of CO2 emissions overall, because you're still using electricity to charge the vehicle, and then that electricity comes in the form of coal. Public transport and carpooling are still even better energy saving transport options, because then you're cutting down on making an individual trip with like one person or two people in a car. You can also incorporate sustainable building designs by decreasing the amount of energy required to build larger buildings and to heat and cool them. You can see green walls, solar panels, green roofs. We're seeing a lot of green roofs nowadays as well, using better and more sustainable products like bamboo and various things that use, very quick growing plants. Those are all really nice. You can also make walls on buildings that decrease the amount of runoff. That's what green roofs do as well. You can even make buildings that absorb the sun's heat to help with the heating of the building. And you can decrease the energy needed for cooling the building and the surrounding areas by building, these green walls so that the all the heat isn't going into the building that you now have to cool. You can put sunlights on the roof or windows on the sides, can decrease the electricity used for lighting. And you can also use recycled materials like we talked about. Okay, managing peak demand. So, peak demand is the time of day or the time of year. Often it's in the early nighttime hours when people are still awake and they want to have light, so they turn on lights, or during very hot weather events when ACs are running constantly. Or conversely, you could even say it's on really, really cold days when heating systems are running all the time. This is when electricity demand is the highest. So if the demand exceeds supplies, then we end up with what we call rolling blackouts, where there's just not enough electricity. And so some areas actually are without power. Or they're even called brownouts when it's getting close to hitting, that demand exceeding supply. And so to manage this, some utilities use a variable price model for electricity, where during peak demand times, they'll actually charge you more for electricity than during non-peak times. So that's something that falls back on the user. And hopefully, what they're hoping is that it'll encourage decreased use. And so that's, because we all want to have lower electricity bills. So if we want to pay that lower rate, we have to use a lower amount of energy. That's another thing that they're doing to try, another incentive that's being used. Um, and that incentivizes like lower overall use, which is a good thing. A smart grid is just the idea of managing demand and energy sources in a more varied way. So during peak times, maybe you use more during peak times, you use more renewable energy sources. So say in Indiana, we rely mostly on our wind energy use during peak times when a lot of energy production is being or a lot of energy consumption is high. And then during non-peak times, that's when we're using our more non-renewable forms of energy production, like the coal production. You can also use smart meters for varying price models. Um, so that's another example, or allowing rooftop solar to direct electricity back to the grid. So we kind of talked about that during the solar unit. Um, all of this is going to um, decrease the amount of energy that is required to power our homes. And some of these larger scale activities will actually do more in the long run than all of the smaller ones put together. So that's something to consider. Okay, this brings us to the end of Unit 6. So here's our last practice FRQ. calculate the percent change in global investment in renewable energy from 2004 to 2014. So look at that, use that graph to help you answer this question, and you can find the answers in the OneNote. If you have any questions with anything in Unit 6, make sure you're talking to me in class, and I'll see you guys soon.